Before I very quickly introduce, I think it's appropriate that we have labor and the environment issues coming back to back, and Dr. Prokopy is going to be talking about the environment and climate change. Before I started my PhD, I spent a couple years working for Al Gore, and we were part of something called the Blue-Green Alliance. And it showed how much it makes sense for labor unions and environmentalists to work together to create green jobs to drive our economy. I've said enough. Get to our next speaker, Linda Prokopy.
So yes, thank you. I was asked to come today to speak about environment and climate change and tell you a little bit about what the Trump administration has done in terms of both of those and give you some ideas about what we can do about those things. Before I do that, I just want to sort of tell you a little bit about who I am. So I am a professor at Purdue. I'm in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources, which is in the College of Agriculture, so we're quite conservative. I'm a social scientist. I study people in the environment. I'm obviously a woman. I'm also an immigrant to this country, but obviously a very privileged immigrant because I came from a white European country. I am a mother. I'm upper middle class, and I'm also a member of this church, and I'm very grateful that our church can do things like this. So moving on to the topic today, one of the most shocking things, there have been many, many shocking things that we have heard this year out of this administration. One of the most shocking things I have heard was said by Robert Phelan, who's a Trump appointee to the EPA Science Advisory Board. He said, modern air is a little too clean for optimum health. Right? So we've heard many, many things, right? But that is just really awful. Tell that to the communities of color in this country that are literally dying from the air they can't breathe. In America, race is the single biggest factor in determining whether you live near a toxic waste site. In Detroit, some research completed by my undergraduate advisor, Paul Mohai at the University of Michigan, shows that 82% of black students in Detroit went to schools in the most polluted parts of the city, while only 44% of the white students went to schools in those polluted parts of the city. So double for the black students. Those children in those pollution-exposed schools scored lower on standardized tests. Not surprising, since we know that air pollution causes cognitive delays in children and a whole lot of different issues during pregnancy. Do we still think that modern air is a little too clean for optimum health? Let's look at Fresno, California. It's the most polluted city in the state. Who lives there? Immigrant farm workers and people of color, many of them below the poverty line. Many of them have asthma. Babies in Fresno are born with asthma. As Carrie Nadeau, a physician and professor at Stanford, says, the baby's lungs never have a chance to develop, normally in the womb, because their mothers live in a high pollution area. And the pregnant woman takes a breath, and the tiny molecules of air pollution pass through her lungs and into her bloodstream, passing on to the fetus, delaying and damaging lung development. And yet, we have a Trump appointee to the Environmental Protection Agency saying that our air is too clean in this country. That is a problem. So in addition to that craziness, what other craziness have we seen in terms of the environment? We've seen many things, which you probably know if you've been peripherally paying attention to the news. And I'll be the first to admit I have not been paying attention to the news as much as I used to pay attention because it is so painful. He has reduced the size of 2 national monuments, losing land that is protected. He has obviously supported his very much beloved oil industry. He approved the Keystone XL pipeline, although Obama was going to do that too. He wants to permit drilling in most U.S. continental shelf waters, including protected areas in the Arctic and Atlantic, and obviously has managed to wheedle in opening up the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge to drilling. So it does lots of little things, lots of big things he's been doing. But one of the single biggest things he's done is hire Scott Pruitt, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency. Scott Pruitt was very anti the Environmental Protection Agency before he was the head, and sued the EPA many times when he was Oklahoma's Attorney General. I'm going to read an edited version of a blog post written by Martha Roberts at the Environmental Defense Fund, which summarizes what she thinks the top 5 things Scott Pruitt has done. And it starts with a nice opening. The imposing limestone government building in central Washington, where Scott Pruitt holds sway, is increasingly operating away from public view, with decisions made behind closed doors, once public information blacked out, and influential insiders taking charge. As administrator of the EPA, he has proven to be elusive. Scott Pruitt has spent more than half his days away, while he's been in office, away from Washington. He has not even been in the city where he's supposed to be doing business. But while he's been away, he's still managed to find time to tear down policies that protect our health and safety. He keeps his schedule secret, so the public cannot even find out basic information about how he spends his business hours and who he spends his time with. All former EPA administrators made their senior management calendars available to the public. He does not. We have a right to know how a high-ranking, taxpayer-funded public servant spends his time and makes decisions that impact us and others. The second thing that's called out is that he has been suspending pollution laws without public input. He has taken several actions to suspend environmental safeguards, including protections against toxic wastewater, oil and gas pollution, and of course, climate pollution. He's attacked a reporter who was covering the EPA. The fourth thing she talks about is rolling back enforcement against polluters. So under Trump's administration, the EPA has quietly reduced enforcement against polluters. 6 months into the administration, the EPA collected 60% less in civil penalties than previous administrations did during their first 6 months. So we are letting corporate America and other polluters run rampant on our lands and in our air and in our water. Pruitt is so covert, I love this part. He earned an award called the Golden Padlock Award, which is an award given by investigative reporters and editors who recognize the most secretive United States agency or individual. The judges were impressed by the breadth and scope of Pruitt's information suppression techniques around vital matters of public interest. This is our environment. It is shocking and disturbing. The fifth thing that she calls out, and this is actually her first, but I moved it to 5 for the flow of my talk, is that he has suppressed web pages about climate change. The EPA is not the only federal agency to be suppressing information about climate change. We know that. He's taken lots of information down, including information about how climate change affects children and pregnant women. So that's the list from the Environmental Defense Fund about the 5 worst things to the environment. And that brings us to climate change. And no talk about the environment would be complete without climate change. On that horrible night back in November 2016, I'm sure we all cried. I cried for the LGBT community. I cried for immigrants. I cried for healthcare. I cried for education. But I cried for all kinds of issues. But what I really caused me to lose sleep was climate change. Even if we were fortunate enough to have Hillary Clinton be our president, I would still be losing sleep over climate change. It is a fast-moving freight train that will cause damage for generations to come, even if we slam on the brakes right now. It is a huge human rights catastrophe that is waiting to happen, and it is a national security threat, although Trump has removed it from the list of national security threats. So why? Why is Pruitt suppressing web pages about climate change? Why is climate change no longer considered a national security threat? I honestly don't know. The evidence and the consensus around climate change is overwhelming. If any of you have questions about that, I would be delighted to talk to you after this. We're seeing so much evidence of climate change already. 2017 was either the second or the third hottest year on record, depending on how you measure it. The ocean is already encroaching on Miami. We're seeing more erratic and extreme weather. And just this week, we learned that 200,000 antelopes that died in 2015 in Kazakhstan died due to the deadly high temperatures that caused the bacteria to turn fatal. But in the face of this overwhelming scientific evidence that climate change is happening and the impacts that's going to have on our world, Trump has stated his intention to withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Agreement, although he can't technically do it until 2020. But we are the only country in the world to be trying not to be part of the Paris Agreement. But there is some hope. 10 states have pledged to continue reducing greenhouse gas emissions on their own. So what can you do? Try and get Indiana to be one of them, because we are not one of them. No Midwestern states are. Hundreds of mayors have spoken up and pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, including Mayor John Dennis. So I am very happy to live in West Lafayette, but many of you probably live in Lafayette. And you know what Mayor Tony Wazorski has done, right? Nothing. So, get busy. Get him to commit to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. What else can you do? Obviously, this is a national day of power to the polls, right? So get out there and vote if you haven't. But more than that, get behind politicians, support them with money, support them with your time, go pound the pavement for them. Make sure the environment and climate change were barely talked about in the last election cycle. It is the #1 issue facing our future. We have to have it on the agenda. Talk to your politicians. Get them up to speed. Make sure people know how to answer these questions and what they would do if they're elected. If you live in Indiana, let's talk to Governor Holcomb about getting our state to continue reducing greenhouse gas emissions on their own. If you live in Lafayette, talk to Mayor Wazorski. Donate. Money. There are lots of national groups on the national scale. Some of my personal favorites are the Environmental Defense Fund and the Natural Resources Defense Council. Locally, we have a citizens climate lobby here in Lafayette. You can donate time to them. You can Google them and find them online. We have a number of other good nonprofits here in town. One of my personal favorites is the Niches Land Trust that protects critical habitats here. And they will gladly take your money and or your time. You can also make changes in your daily life. So think about how you even got here today, right? Because I was doing this talk, I walked down the hill because I thought, gosh, I should drive less. But you can eat less meat. Doesn't mean eat no meat, but eat less meat, especially less beef. Drive less if you have to drive a fuel-efficient car. Use energy-efficient appliances. Turn them off when you're not using them, which is, of course, another thing Trump has done. He's trying to kill the Energy Star program. Again, like some of the things he's doing are they just make no sense. No sense. Anyway, you should fly less. I fly an awful lot for work, so I am horribly guilty there. We hear this refrain, reduce, reuse, recycle. We've been hearing it since the 70s. But how much are you individually doing it in your individual life? So I challenge you all just to think about what can you personally do to reduce the amount of waste that you are producing. Reuse what you can, and then recycle what's left, right? But recycling is the last choice. First, you should be reducing. New research shows that the 4 actions that you can take that substantially decrease your carbon footprint, so that help with climate change, are eating a plant-based diet, avoiding air travel, living car-free, and having smaller families. So cycling back to the beginning of my talk, I talked about the disproportionate impacts of air pollution on people of color. The disproportionate impacts of climate change are going to astound us, and we will start seeing them. We are already seeing them. All of our children, our grandchildren, even us will see those in our lifetime. People of color, people in developing countries, and women are all expected to bear the highest burden. The future is literally in our hands. Please act.
Thank you so much.